say that.
Oh, that's fine.
Coming home then.
All right. Well, good evening, and welcome to the Special Board of Commissioners meeting for Monday, July 8th. Could you all please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome, and I hope everyone had a great July 4th holiday. It was very nice, and thank you. I know Township staff, you guys are working hard with all the storms that we had. Thank you all very much. I heard Commissioner Gray was a great parade. Okay. Right, so first order of business, public participation. Do we have anyone that would like to speak this evening regarding anything on the agenda or otherwise? No? Okay. Twinning Construction Settlement Agreement. Mr. Rice.
Yes. As the board knows, you received sort of an explanation in the history of this claim. This is a construction claim that arose out of the Clement Crone Park Improvement Project. Twining was the general contractor. Twining didn't complete the work and refused to come back to finish the job at a certain point during that project. It ended up, they filed a lawsuit against the township, against Kimmel Beaugret, and against Land Studies, who was Kimmel Beaugret's subcontractor that did the, I believe, the rain gardens primarily. So that claim then was handled by the township's insurance carrier. They provided legal counsel, and there was a mediation held in March, and a recommended settlement. What's in front of you tonight is that settlement. The settlement involved the township paying $95,000, Kimmel Beaugret paying $10,000, and Land Studies paying $15,000 to Twining. Twining's original claim was about $230,000. So, and what this does is it resolves all other potential claims between the parties. The three defendants were the township, Kimmel Beaugret, and Land Studies, and Twining never finished the project. Never finished, because they wouldn't come back. So, anyway, it's in front of the board for approval. Everyone else has approved it. I think Bill and Bob, you've had communication from the insurance carrier about payment, assuming the board approves this tonight. But this will be the end of it. There'll be no other claims or cross claims or anything else between the parties. So my recommendation is the board approve it. I think it's a good resolution. Saves a lot of other legal fees. It saves a lot of other potential claims, against the township and against the other parties. But it's in front of you for final approval tonight.
Before we discuss, can I get a motion to approve the settlement agreement?
So moved. I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? Commissioner comment? Is there any staff comment? Is there any public comment on the motion to approve settlement agreement? Great, I'll call the vote. All those in favor of approving the Twining Construction Settlement Agreement, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes 6-0 with Commissioner Booker absent. All right, Resolution 2019-66, Young Lungs at Play Program. Commissioner Abel.
Do you guys want to talk about what's in there?
The resolution that was prepared, which we had discussed previously, discusses items in regards to the prohibiting of tobacco products, e-cigarettes, cigars, vaping from the parks. Again, this is one that I know has been discussed for a while. Signage would be installed in areas that would best benefit the particular play areas. So this is on for the board's approval tonight.
Can I get a motion to approve?
I'll move for approval.
Second.
Any commissioner comments to the resolution?
I'm not going to be able to support this as it is written. I think it's too overly broad, and it talks about the park. I entirely endorse the idea that we shouldn't smoke at the playgrounds or on the sidelines of ball games. But the parks are for the public, and unfortunately, some of the public smoke. And I think that it's overly broad. Also, the whereases only support prohibition against cigarettes. You can't get smokeless tobacco out of these whereas clauses. And so as such, I really can't support it.
Any other comments?
I will be supporting it, although I think it doesn't go far enough in the sense of, I think that this campus here should be smoke-free. If we're looking at banning plastic bags because it's
Not
bad for
anymore.
the...
Can't do that anymore.
Okay, well, I'm just saying, but we looked
State
at...
took that
Yeah,
away
the
from
state
us.
took it away.
But if we are looking at, and this board did look at banning plastic bags because it's bad for the animals, cigarette smoke is bad for kids. And I have a 3-year-old and an 11-year-old, and the kids at the playgrounds, and that looks like a championship game right there at Enki being played. We should support our children's health, and not only our children's health, but our own health as well. So I will be supporting it.
Yeah, I'll support it as well. I mean, I see it as more of a benefit for the children that are using the parks. Obviously, I have an interest in that. I saw Disney just did this, I think, at their parks in Florida and California. They banned any smoking, I presume because families are there in a family atmosphere, so I'll be supporting it.
Don't have to clean.
So can I just add, just for some clarity, so this is not a ban. It's not banning smoking. It's regulating it, saying it's prohibited, but it's not a ban. So if I go and I smoke in a park and someone says to me, hey, there's a sign that says you can't smoke, and I'm like, and I still decide to smoke, what kind of, what can be done about that? Like, is there anything that can be done? So this is not a ban, correct?
Police will be responding. Chris has already talked about having warnings, that actually if someone is smoking, they'll be issued a warning to say that this is a policy of the board that smoking is prohibited in our parks. Now, there are a lot of, I think John did a nice job of allowing a lot of latitude here. The sanctions that can be, enforcement can be based on what law sits out there. So I think this works very well. I want to thank John for putting this together today.
This is a resolution. So the gentleman that came and made the presentation to the board at the last meeting, he talked about an ordinance. His draft ordinance had fines and penalties, and if this was an ordinance and someone complained about my neighbor smoking, and the township had to send the police department, there could be a warning. If it was someone that was just going to smoke anyway, we would end up filing a citation, a non-traffic citation. We could be in front of district justice court, but I understood that the board's direction after that presentation and the discussion with the staff is that you wanted to set a policy. So it is a prohibition.
Mm-hmm.
It's just that it's not in the form of an ordinance, so you're not going to have those ordinance penalties. The only penalties you have in here is if it's a group that's got a permit or permission from the township, you have the right to pull that permit or permission.
So can I just ask a question? So if I'm there, so I have a permit, so I'm assuming like Radnor Wayne Little League has a permit for the fields. If somebody's there smoking, is it up to Radnor Wayne Little League to tell them not to smoke? Like how does that all work? That's what I'm just concerned about.
That's going to be one of the things that Tammy will be reaching out to all the sports leagues to say this is the policy of the board. We'd ask them to take that step and inform coaches to inform the parents that this is what we're doing.
So we'll be adding it to like the rules and regs for the parks,
Mhm.
and it'll be at like the form that you have to fill out in order to get a permit. Like all that
Tammy's
stuff.
actually working on trying to streamline the signs and saying here's what the regulations are for the parks, and that'll be one that'll be added. eventually what we want to do, there's a plethora of signs everywhere in the
Yeah,
parks, is to
yeah.
try to narrow that down. But I think right now to put these signs up, I think will set the tone that basically in the whole park area, you can't smoke.
Okay, I guess those were my two questions. Anyone else have anything else?
Will this satisfy whatever requirements we need in order to get the free signage for the program?
I think the question, he was asked that question about whether it was an ordinance or a resolution. So, I mean, we tracked his language and it established the policy. I don't see why not, Jack. I mean, I think he was pushing for an ordinance, but the question came up whether it was a resolution or not, and I think you'll be fine with it.
We can revisit it if there's an issue.
And it would be up to staff as to where the signs are gonna go, like you guys, like Tammy and her team will decide.
And also we'll try to work on where these are, and again, they can be adjusted, moved to as well.
Okay. Any other questions?
And Bob, I mean, obviously I'm going to support this. I hope there's a public information campaign that will go
Absolutely.
side by side with
Yes.
this, so it can really have an impact with the children.
Right, it will be, and I know that there's impact then too, is we'll let the schools know as well, with their fields, if they want to try to follow behind us too, and all the studies that are out there about the harm of e-cigarettes and vaping and those, and just tobacco products altogether, especially with kids.
John, sorry, can we as a board issue fines for
No.
people smoking? So you can't,
No.
there's no fines. So it's basically just a sign and there's really, so what's a warning gonna do? You could have 10 warnings if there's no fine.
Well,
I mean, if the police, I don't know if they would get called 10 times, but if I have 10 cigarettes, 10 different occasions and get 10 warnings, it'll never be,
I'm sure it'll pop up in the police system.
You're gonna have to have the organizations and individuals self-police this. I mean, it's not an ordinance, so you're not gonna have fines.
It's just a resolution.
It's gonna be, maybe your permission to enter the park gets revoked if you have a permit, or to use the park gets revoked. But, if there's gotta be something a little more severe than what's in this policy, you can revisit it, go back.
Well, it should cut down some of the smoking, so that will be a good thing.
Just one other, I'm sorry, and I'm not a lawyer, but in the first, item number 1, it says that all areas of parks and playgrounds where children are present. Should we strike that where children are present, that all areas of parks and playgrounds within Radnor Township? Like, what if someone's like, oh, there's no kids here, why can't I smoke? I don't know, I'm just.
I wouldn't
You wouldn't?
overthink that too much. I mean, I guess it could say where children are or may be present.
Okay,
We could make that change.
okay.
But if they're present at any time, I think it would apply. Whether they're currently there at that moment when somebody's smoking, I think it still would apply. But if the board wants to add that where children are or may be present, I could add that to the resolution just to clear it up.
Okay. Does anyone object to that?
The tree falls in the wood and no one hears it, this makes.
I'm just saying.
Still
Listen,
no.
I work on a smokeless campus, and there are people who stand right outside my office and smoke.
Well, I know
And
that's
we're like, dude, there's a sign right there. It says smokeless.
Yeah, I think that when you walk into this door, I don't think you should let the smoke out front.
We are working on that because with the unions, we will designate one area on this campus where they can smoke.
Okay.
So it'll be downstairs on the far end of the building. There will be a designated area, but we have to work because of the union agreements. But we will be designated an area, so we will get rid of this. Here and then this sits on park land, so technically you can't smoke at all.
Any other commissioner questions, concerns, comment? Any staff comment? Is there any public comment?
Do you need to vote on your resolution?
Aaron Gemmer, Wayne.
Southwood. Baron Gemmer, Southwood. Two things. One of which I want to follow up on Lisa's point, because I saw the same thing. I either, because you look at all the whereases, and only one of them really raises the children, so I'm not sure why even now therefore only specifically says children. I don't know if we have places in the park where children are allowed. I'm not seeing the purpose of where children are present, period, adding the or maybe. It just should be all areas of parks and playgrounds within Radnor Township. I'm not seeing that buys us anything. I think it only confuses the issue, because adults have the same problem. So to me, I would like to see that amended to be, to strike that. And also the point about the dynamic, but if you strike it, it won't matter whether children happen to be there or not. Secondly, is the intent here, do we consider the trail to be a park? Because that's,
Yes.
okay, I just want to make sure, because reading this, it wasn't clear, and that's one of the bigger issues, because that's a
I asked that
much,
question when it first came out.
much narrower thing. I support that, and I would like to see that stricken so it's not ambiguous. Thank you.
Aaron, are you and I thinking alike?
Good evening, Tim Fry, Ward 7. I think this is a good proposal here. I think it's looking to the future. I think it's good. It's taking care of an issue before it becomes an issue, which I think is a sign of good governance. And I applaud the board for looking at this resolution. Following a little bit on what Baron was saying, and this might be a little bit of a hyper-technicality, it's my understanding that this resolution is designed to regulate township property and not going beyond that to private property. And if so, looking at the first paragraph there, I would simply insert township after the fourth word so that it reads that all areas of township parks and playgrounds, since parks and playgrounds are not defined in this document, it avoids any ambiguity. But otherwise, I think this is a good measure looking to the future to try to help our children, which I think is what this board should be doing.
Thank you. Any other comment?
Yeah, I'm going to speak
Oh, sorry,
during public comment.
Oh, sorry.
First of all, there is absolutely no parking spaces down there. Absolutely no. I got here at 20 after 6 for a 6:30 meeting, and
I saw you driving. I can
only
attest to that.
only right now was able to get a park, and it's not like there was, well, just go, park over there by the dumpster or park illegal. There's not even an illegal spot to get. So my choices were to park in handicap, which I wasn't going to do, or to park over there at the apartments, which I decided not to do because I'm not going to risk getting towed with a new car. That's just it.
Well, thank you for all your
So
You should get a
we
decal.
got. I don't know what we can do. What's that? No, I want to hear the joke.
No.
What was it? What was it?
So you should get a decal.
I don't have a decal in this car. This is a new car. And even if I had a decal, it's still illegally parked. I don't know whether it would work, it would do anything. So, I apologize for being late, but not really my fault. Okay. Now.
Don't take it.
All right, no, I'm not owning it. I'm not gonna own this lateness. All right, because I was here on time. And actually, when I found a spot, I would just by the time I got there, somebody like Lisa or Jake, somebody pulled into my spot. This was, hold on, even in the township. Anyway, where are you? Where were you? I got your text, right?
We're almost ready to vote.
Rich, do you have something to say regarding Resolution 2019-66?
I do have something to say regarding that, and that was just my preamble.
All right, well, we appreciate that. How about Resolution 2019-66?
Now, so we got to do something about parking out here, or else schedule these meetings when we can have parking, because commissioners, if we're going to work, I mean, or let's not have the meeting.
Can we add money in the budget to the
solve this
buffer
building
of
and find
3-story
out.
garage?
No, we just got to schedule
Can we
meetings
all stay
properly.
on- We are on
Just
Resolution.
let's schedule the
We are
meetings.
on Resolution
Cancel the
2019-66. I think there is a baseball game out there, which is taking up some of the parking, but
Apparently.
play ball.
Apparently, so.
But you're
maybe
here,
we
so
should-
we're glad.
Maybe we should make the
So what do you have to
meetings
say
later
about
or something, after
Resolution
dark or something.
2019-66?
So, here's my view on this, and I talked with you, and I wish I got to hear the rest of the commissioners and see where we are on this. This is combination of many different issues. If this is the issue of young lungs and the program from the state, I'm supportive of banning smoking near children. That would mean in playgrounds, which would be defined to include ball fields, stands, jungle gyms, playground areas. Adults should not be smoking around children and affect the young lungs. It should be tailored to avoid all smoking around children. So I think that is something that I can read into the Young Lungs program that qualifies for that. However, what I don't want to do is to establish either smoking zones in parks, which some have said if you have a you have to have a smoking area. I don't know what the law is on that, and perhaps you addressed it, but and I'm also very concerned about enforcement. What we heard at the last meeting was that, well, you don't need to enforce this. Smokers will, they'll just obey it. I've talked to a lot of people about this since last meeting. I do not believe that we can impose something like this without enforcement. It has to be enforced. If you're going to put this in, you have to enforce it. If somebody complains, they need to know that they are acting within the law and within the support of the police and others in the township that will enforce their wish to make somebody stop smoking around children. And I agree with that. However, to me, it seems overly broad to make all areas in all public parks non-smoking. If somebody's walking on a trail and smokes, I don't think that impedes anyone's enjoyment of the parks. And I do not believe that government should deprive people of the liberty. So liberty means not just freedom. Liberty means freedom plus the ability to be unaccosted by an overly burdensome government. And you all know my 4 values: lower taxes, smaller government, greater individual liberty, and personal responsibility.
And parking spaces.
And no, parking spaces is not a value. And I haven't done that plug. But we don't want to have people walking through the parks and then be policing somebody smoking a cigarette on the trail. Now, I understand if the issue is littering, you're not allowed to litter on the trails, I think, right? Isn't that against the law? All right, so you can't throw a cigarette butt down there right now. But to stop smoking everywhere, to me, seems overly broad. I would like to tailor this or to interpret it as it's written as applying to the areas around where children are in accordance with the Young Lungs edict. But I don't believe in a full tobacco ban, and all smoking should be prohibited, which would mean also cannabis that was for medical or whatever purposes. So, and I've heard that you can't smoke cannabis in the parks. I don't know if that's the case, if there's medical, if there's case, whatever the law is on that. I don't know what the law is. Also, I will disclose, I have holdings in Philip Morris and Altria, as well as certain cannabis stocks as well. So I do invest in this space. However, it's not influencing what my thoughts are on this. Again, the issues are enforcement and the issue of smoking around children rather than just smoking outside. The public park should be a place for enjoyment of all peoples in the township and others, and that should not be unduly infringed. So that's where I am on this. Can we interpret this resolution to apply to the parks, meaning the playgrounds and ball fields, not everywhere in the park?
Well, right now, the way it's being interpreted is parks, playgrounds, and trails. The trails would be part of it. So if you want to exclude the trails, you're going to have to specifically exclude the trails. I mean, the discussion before you got here, Rich, was does this apply to the trails? And I think it does, that's part of the township park, but I would leave trails in here specifically if you wanted to apply to the trail, so we don't get into that dispute, that disagreement that I just heard with somebody, or exclude the trails. So right now, that first, I mean, based on the comments, the first paragraph would read, all areas of township, parks, playgrounds, and trails within Radnor Township. So eliminating the reference to children would be designated as tobacco-free. So the board's got to decide.
Wait, eliminating reference to children, what did you say?
Well, there were some comments about, there were some comments in here in the first sentence, Rich, that all areas of township parks, playgrounds, and trails where children are or may be present. One of the comments was, why even have that in there?
Because that's the point of young lungs.
Correct. Correct. But the rest of the resolution tells you why this is being adopted.
So was that stricken, and was there a motion, was that stricken, or is that still in?
Not.
It's still there.
It's still there.
We changed it to where children are present and added or may be present.
Or may be present.
Because I thought if you say where children are present and somebody's standing next to a playground smoking, there's no kids there, I'm gonna say, well, there's no kids here. So it's okay to smoke, even though it's not okay to smoke. Bob, I mean, Rich, you make good points. I mean, it's not technically a ban, but Bob, do you wanna address, for Rich, I know you already said this, but some of the thoughts are from Superintendent Flanagan around.
We're gonna be writing warnings for people who don't smoke. And this also includes e-cigarettes, vaping, and that. So the standard is that actually, you know, the township, again, taking a leadership role, that we should look to prohibit these types of activities here in the township.
Why? Why would we have vaping included? This is tobacco, and it's overly broad even with tobacco. It should exclude.
Vaping is even worse and is a problematic within schools.
Because no one wants to
within
breathe
students.
someone's back.
So actually, if the research is there, you'll see that actually it's more harmful. than
Rich, no one wants to breathe someone's back. It's the same thing as backwash. No one wants to breathe
It's
someone's
not backwash, it's secondhand smoking.
Yeah, no one wants to
Secondhand
breathe it
vaping,
in.
there's absolutely no medical documentation of that being harmful in any way.
It's because vaping has only been around for 15 minutes. You can't have
But it doesn't, so why would you ban it? But listen, the program that came before us was Young Lungs. It was applied to tobacco around children. That I can get behind. I see no reason to ban vaping. It's water vapor. It has no effect on anybody other than the person who is using it.
So
and
in
people
the-
over 21 or over 18 should be allowed to vape. That's their
So in
right.
the fact sheet that the gentleman who gave the presentation at our last meeting handed out, says the Surgeon General, in 2016, the Surgeon General concluded that secondhand emissions contain nicotine, ultrafine particles, secondhand e-cigarette emissions, contain nicotine, ultrafine particles, flavorings such as diacetyl, a chemical linked to serious lung disease, volatile organic compounds such as benzene, which is found in car exhaust, and heavy metals such as nickel, tin, and lead.
2016.
2016, yes. And that would be the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services e-cigarette use among youth and young adults.
Among youth.
Youth and young
What that
adults.
is, that's a ban, that is a ban of e-cigarettes on false pretenses. I don't believe that's the case. I don't believe it. And in any event, kids should not use e-cigarettes and vape. Adults that choose to should be able to in the public parks, which are for everyone, not around children. So did the amendment pass that says, or where children may be present? Did that pass?
Well, it hasn't been, there was a motion and there was a second, so we're going to
So
amend
we're-
this.
Yes, it is written. We haven't done anything with the
So
amendment.
right now, then on the floor is the
It's the base. It's
base or as amended with, or children may be.
There have been no amendments.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was
Well, there was
just,
just that
As is,
language.
what's on the floor is what's in the packet.
Maybe we just call them.
Call them.
Call the vote.
All right. But then, do we need to officially amend it with that, or maybe present?
yeah, I'll amend that.
Okay.
And I would also add township,
Add
parks and
township.
playgrounds to make it clear that we're not dealing with other parks and playgrounds.
And trails.
Okay, so, I make a motion to amend, item 1 of resolution 2019-66, that all areas of adding township, parks and playgrounds where children are present, and then adding or may be present within Radnor Township, et cetera, et cetera.
Second.
Any comment on that?
I think if there are kids around, you shouldn't be smoking or having any of that, so you should probably just take that out. It doesn't have to be in the township if there's kids around. Again, this is a resolution, so if it's even like a private nursery school, you can see kids there. If they wanted a sign, I don't know if they're allowed to have a sign or not, but
No, this is only dealing with township. This is
Township
not dealing with
property.
any private nursery schools or anything like that. This is only our parks and playgrounds. And we clarified that by adding the word township.
Right.
So it's not private nursery schools or any other schools that have their own, or any other playgrounds that might be attached to some place where kids are. It's just our parks. Our parks, our playgrounds, and trails, which are technically part of parks.
I would not agree to, or may be present. I mean, children may be present anywhere. And does parks include the sidewalks in Wayne? Children may be present?
It's not a park.
All right, well, so the amendment's on the floor.
Playground.
Is there any comments to the amendment? Any additional comments to the amendment?
One further, Bob, so this is gonna be enforced by, what, you said warnings by what? Police. So if somebody, here's my concern, you'll be at a game, or maybe you'll be at a baseball field between games.
driving.
No,
looking for
no,
parking spots.
there's two families standing there, and one dad decides he wants to smoke between the games and there's no kids. And another father will say, you put that out. And he said, and then I'm calling the police. So you're gonna come and cite that person and enforce this.
Not an ordinance, Rich, there'll be no citing. There's no ordinance. This is a resolution, statement of policy.
So what's the enforcement then?
The only enforcement, since it's not an ordinance, is that if you have some permit or permission to be in the park or use the park, some of these programs, then you could be at risk of having that permission taken away by the town.
All right, so there's no.
But that won't stop the two guys from getting into a fight over this.
Rich, can we?
Self-policing, let them do that.
Can we?
Why do you want to jump into that?
I don't want two people to be fighting over
Well,
this.
Be disorderly conduct and arrest them.
You arrest them both.
If they're fighting, then they'll be arrested for fighting, not for smoking.
All right, let's just vote on the amendment. So, is there any comment on the amendment? We've heard public comment. All right. I'm going to call the vote to the amendment. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay.
Which have you?
Aye.
So, John, have you?
Nay.
You voted nay?
Wait, no.
4-3. Okay. I'm sorry. Everyone's
Wait,
not
Luke
speaking.
voted nay. You voted nay.
I voted aye.
He voted aye. So the amendment stands. Okay.
It's delayed.
Yeah, it was
It is a
delayed.
delayed.
Because he raised his hand.
All right, so the amendment stands, and now I'm going to call the vote on Resolution 2019-66. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed?
Nay. Nay.
Motion passes 5-2. Okay. Thank you all. Thank you.
I got that out of the way.
All right, now we will move on to discussion of community organization funding. Mr. White?
I think so.
Mr. Kowski? Thank you. Patiently waiting.
All right, so the purpose of tonight's meeting is to discuss the funding that the township provides to various community organizations. Our goal, when we added this to the list back in January, is to get a board policy on setting the amounts and the payees going forward, and then if the board wishes to add any requirements of those groups, either financial performance or any kind of other metrics that you want to see going forward. Because what has happened is the background is in the years that we've been budgeting, we've kind of seen this go both ways. There's always pressure on the manager to present a budget most of the time with a 0% tax increase. And in years where the revenues are constrained, it's difficult to put all that together with the community organization. So what ultimately ended up happening is that administratively we're vacating positions, we're foregoing capital purchases, we're making reductions on the administrative end, and then at the last second, usually these amounts get added in at the full amount. So what it constantly does administratively is it puts the manager in a pickle, because as we've heard from each of these organizations through the years when they've come and presented to the board, there is a need from their perspective for the funding. Obviously, the township and past boards have agreed on giving the amounts, so there's an agreement there that the funding is important from the township's perspective. But it puts the administrative or the administration and the tasks that the manager's charged with accomplishing every year when putting the budget together, it puts his priorities at ends or at odds with funding these communities, community organizations, and so it's a bit of a tough spot for him to be in, because he's the one presenting a budget, and so in a couple of these years that the budget included reductions to those amounts, and that's never easy to make that presentation, especially when the need is there. And then in 1 year, in response to conflicts that occurred prior, we left the amounts blank completely, presented the budget to the board and asked the board to fill it in, and that wasn't received well by the commissioners who were here then as well. So we've kind of gone all over the place with this, and we were hoping by adding this to the special meetings is to have a discussion and hopefully get to a point where the board provides policy on how you'd like to see these organizations funded, how you'd like to see it packaged in the budget. Is it something, some of the ideas that have been thrown out in the past it's like some allocation of the millage, and that's what it's a fixed number, and then whatever that millage is going to generate, the board divvies it up amongst the organizations from there. It's a fixed amount. We're at 1.2 million and change this year with this year's budget. And I'm looking at the amount that's being funded by taxes. So, however we want to come up with a plan for budgeting and assuming that we're going to continue to fund these organizations, how we want to see this in the budget. What we prepared tonight, just as a bit of groundwork, is we've identified who the community organizations are that we have funded since 15. This list has stayed pretty much the same in all of these years, and actually in the 10 years we've been budgeting, this list has stayed consistent. There were a couple years in 17 and 18 where the library's share of the base operating contribution was pulled back a little bit. The argument at the time was that due to their constrained footprint because of the construction at the primary building, that they didn't have the same operating costs with personnel. And then as soon as they moved back into the new facility, the funding this year went back up to pre-construction amounts plus some growth for cost growth or increases over that time. So that's why you see the variation from 16 to 19 with it going downward is some reductions in the library. But the other organizations have stayed relatively consistent with minor increases. The Radnor Historical Society was added in 2015. Prior, it was zero. That wasn't a community organization that was funded. And the parades have been $4,000 per parade for as long as we can go back. There was a year where we didn't fund either one of them, but that was 2010 or 11, I can't remember. But, and then, so those are community organizations that are funded through taxes or general resources of the township. We do have the Wayne Business Association and Wayne Presbyterian Church, where we have revenue sharing agreements, and those we're sharing parking revenue with those organizations. The WBA, we're sharing a percentage of the parking over the AT&T lot, and then the Wayne Pres Church, it's part of our ground lease with them that we share revenue there. So when we're talking about the amounts going forward, we wanted to add them to the list just so everyone's aware that the township is contributing funds. But the amounts that we share are based on agreements and other revenue sources, so that's kind of outside of the policy that we're looking for going forward. It's just these groups up here. So that's the background. You can see that the amount is significant, $1.2 million out of the general fund in 2019 for these organizations. And again, we've kind of gone all over the place. We've had them come in and present. I think we did that last fall in this room, as a matter of fact. And then what they had asked for was, for the most part, I think included in the budget. And so we can either continue doing that. We're really looking for direction from the board on how you would like to see this category of funding added going forward.
So, do you have anything like to support any ideas? So you noted an allocation of a millage. I think we could do it that way. We could continue it as the groups come and they ask for what they think they need. What other options? Well, how do other townships do it? So, to me, these are services that the township isn't necessarily providing, like we as the township, but this is kind of our way of providing those services as a township, or supporting those services that are beneficial to township residents. Are there other ways that other townships do this or make decisions around this, or?
Well, the only one that I have specific knowledge of is libraries. A couple of our neighbors, the libraries are part of the township. It's not run by a separate entity. It's run by the municipality itself. And in which case, I'm not sure how they divvy up their funds to make that happen, if they have dedicated millage or not. I'm not sure. But we've talked about it with some of the other cost centers that we've discussed this year. And the pros of dedicated millage are that it draws a line between making sure that organization gets funded versus all of the other things that get tossed around during the budget or competed against during the budget. So it would carve that out and make it its own either single entity, if we just did the library, say, since it's the biggest, or if we did it as a group and carved out a full 1.2 or whatever the amount is. That's the benefit there. The downside is that leaves a $1.2 million gap in the budget, so it doesn't necessarily leave or solve the problems that we have administratively when we present the budgets.
Why does it leave a gap if you leave it out?
Well, what I'm referring to there is what I said at the beginning, is that there's only so much resources, right? So our revenue numbers are only so much. When it comes down to filling in all the expenses, what ultimately happens is that these line items historically have taken priority over administrative line items. So if there's money to be cut to balance a budget, it's come on the backs of vacating public works positions, foregoing capital programs, things that the township itself is required to do. And so that's the competition. And you've been here long enough, Commissioner, that you've been part of these discussions where we go round and round, and usually we're able to plug it in the 11th hour. But like I said, it's usually because something administratively got taken out.
So just touching on Lisa's point, so these are basically services that, as Lisa said, they're township services that we wind up outsourcing by giving, quote unquote, outsourcing by funding them through our tax dollars. That's kind of how
Why do you disagree with that, Bob?
These aren't township services.
No, they're
Yeah,
not.
I didn't say that.
They're
Okay.
not township services.
Well, I mean, we need a library. We're not going to run the library, but we pay. Our tax dollars go to fund the library because we don't do it.
The decision was made at some point that was.
I view that as almost outsourcing of something that we're not going to do, or you could call it a donation. I don't know what you want to call it. The one thing that I would see, because these are third-party entities for one reason or another that really are not totally associated with the township, they're the one-off or two-off, is that if we do give them money, the big takeaway that I have right now is that if we do give them money somewhere on some of their literature or whatever, it should say that these services are funded in part by Radnor Township. And any, and the buying of services or goods within Radnor will help pay for these services going forward. Basically, that these services wind up getting subsidized through our tax dollars and even our mercantile dollars too. So the more money that stays in Radnor, and these are in Radnor, people should know that. So when they pick up literature, if you want the library, you should shop in Radnor because that money stays in Radnor. And you always hear, oh, shop local because it stays local. Now you see it. A lot of times you hear it, but when you look at this and you look at a funding gap, now you see it. So I think that my big ask right now, my big takeaway, is that if they're going to get money from us, they should advertise that part of that money is coming from the township and to sponsor Radnor businesses to keep the cycle of this circle going.
So, I think kind of the elephant in the room, or not, and I guess I will say it is, the idea. I hear you guys saying that funding these. This is how I'm interpreting what you're saying. Funding these groups is a drain on the township resources for other areas.
Well, yeah,
Am I kind of summarizing what you're saying?
It's competition.
These are services that the Board of Commissioners has thought about and said they feel they're important enough to fund.
And I don't disagree with that. I'm just trying
This
to
isn't
frame
just
the
out of the
conversation.
blue. The only one that really is relatively new, Bill, like 5 years, is the Historical Society.
Yeah, and
The others go back.
if I wasn't clear enough in the beginning, I'll reiterate. I'm not making a value judgment on the decisions to fund these organizations. That's not the point here. The point here is looking for a policy from the board on how you want to fund these going forward. Because what we've done for the past few years, it hasn't worked. It's caused either last second headaches, it's put the manager in a bad spot because he's recommending pulling funding back from some of these organizations, which obviously they're not real happy with, and he ends up getting the darts thrown at him for that, but he's trying to fit it all in.
That's good. Why would we want the darts thrown at us? We're not recommending it, he's recommending it. Right?
Okay, so
when I recommend zero.
yeah, and that's exactly the criticism that he got a couple of years ago, or we all got administratively when the budget was presented. So zeros were put in, and then the commissioners at the time were upset about that. So it's a constant tug of war, and so what we're looking for is a policy on how you would like to see this going forward. Well, I don't think anybody thinks that we should just wipe this out. I mean, I
Yeah.
don't think that appetite's here, so I think.
Absolutely.
I think we
Well,
can all.
it might be though.
Okay, Rich, if you wanna go with that, you go with that.
I'm just saying it
Not
might
on that.
be.
You might be
Why
in the
not?
minority
But
on
if
that one,
we're,
Rich.
so, like last year, we had a bit of a down year specifically because of the business tax, the business tax, right, the Act 511s. I don't know if we make it, if we look at it and see what the percentage is, it's, we're $40 million, so we're at whatever percentage this is. I don't know if we make it a percentage, so that essentially these entities kind of take the ride with us, and if we have a down year, they get a little less, and we can base it upon something. I don't want to cut anybody's funding, but if our revenue's down, then they probably need to take the haircut with us, right? I mean, isn't that logical? I hate to say it, but
That's definitely one way to look at it.
I don't know. That'd be my thought.
Stop that.
I don't want to take money away from any of these folks, but at the same time, I think we all have to,
Well, I think.
I don't know. That's my thought. I'm just throwing an idea out there, that's all. That's all I'm doing.
In my
I
opinion.
think it's not bad.
Sure, it is valued. We are what's considered, no offense to any of these organizations, we are viewed as the Bank of Radnor. Come to us, we'll give you money. There are no stipulations placed upon anybody who gets money to say what is the need, what is the requirement, why do you come from us? We are the only public agency in the township that gives money to these organizations. Nobody else does. The county, I'm aware of them setting aside money specifically for these. I believe the library gets a certain share from the county, I believe. But no, I mean, the school district doesn't provide any funding.
Senior center
in
gets
any of these
COSA.
organizations, pardon?
Senior center gets COSA.
But it's not from school.
County.
The school, okay, but you know, you look at all of the issues that we don't address. We didn't fund the capital program this year, but we've given these dollars away. You look at the library; their costs are not going to go down. Fire isn't even up here, so that's a different conversation.
Well, on that point, is everything up here? What about the women's center? Wasn't that on there too?
They've asked for money. We've had other groups ask us for money, but they weren't funded. This is only who has been funded.
It's been funded, so,
Correct.
but
Yes.
fire, isn't that a 501c3 separate as well?
It is, we decided not to include it in tonight's discussion because we had the special meeting a few months ago and we didn't want to.
Okay.
We didn't want to confuse the issues.
Anything else like that you have okay, so this is everything then? All right.
I know I've spoken before about levies, specific funding levies for police and fire, so they don't have to come back here and every year ask for specific money.
I thought
That there would be a continuing.
I thought we were waiting for a recommendation from staff on how we fund the fire companies going forward.
Which we met last week to discuss that. We'll be meeting more to find out what their exact dollar need is and then how that's going to grow. Because I don't think we want to recommend a levy and then all of a sudden, a year later, we're short.
As well as incentives, we talked about some incentivizing for volunteers.
Yeah, we have a lot of that information pulled together. It's the long-term forecasts that we need to go through with the fire companies first.
But again, I think what we're looking for is if that's something of those two particular ones, you know, to look at a levy where they're separated, then they can base on for years moving forward. They have a revenue stream that's not contingent on anything that occurs here.
I like Luke's idea that we make it a percentage of gross proceeds or net proceeds, whichever you want to use, and just cap it. And in order to change that cap, that would be a separate discussion.
How would you keep up with inflation on that?
What inflation?
Well,
You wouldn't, you would just base it on revenue,
so you base it on revenue,
just
period.
base it on tax revenue.
Yeah, it's the same basis that we're budgeting from for all the township operations.
So if you have a stellar year and you're in the business privilege or mercantile tax, they would get a windfall.
No, I didn't say you had to do it. I said cap it.
Cap it. Okay.
Right, that doesn't mean you have to give the money away.
what seems to me to be important is the number one thing is it that we are actually providing these services and that these are township services and that this 501c3 organizations are actually doing it at a lower cost to the township taxpayers than we otherwise would. We could take over all of these functions, and this could be township staff and township employees. That likely would cost more than having these separate groups handle it.
No question.
So is the theory that this is, what we need to decide is this township priorities that the Board of Commissioners has decided is part of the government purpose, or is this extra as it's been interpreted? So it seems to me that I think the library we talked about, most townships have a library, right? And I think you could make the argument that the library, with the library, Radnor Memorial Library Board and their organization, actually would cost less than if we had this as a township facility.
No question.
I think you could make that.
Sure.
However, I'm not sure that all of those are in the same vein. But I think, though, in general, if we tried to do these, if we think that this is important, we try to do them ourselves, this actually saves money by outsourcing some of it. That's my view. And while we can talk about, I don't have a problem with every year seeing if we're going to fund it. I'm okay with that. I can live with it. And what I would want you to do, and I've talked with Catherine and also with you, Bill, this 1.2 million, that should be separately stated on your tax bill so that we know, and it works out to be about $140 per, on average, per taxpayer. That $140, we should call that out in this times with the new tax law where we're limited on your state and local tax deduction. This at least gives you arguably, you can make the case that that's a charitable donation, and that those are all up to 501c3 organizations, and therefore perhaps you could take the position that that is a deductible expense, even though you exceeded your 10,000 limit on your state and local tax deduction. So I've asked at the beginning of the year, I'm begging you to put on our bill a line item to take that 1.2 million and allocate it for every taxpayer with a formula so that we see what that is, what every taxpayer is of that, and so that you can avail yourself of that, at least make the case for those who can use it. Other than that, we need to decide each year if we're going to fund these things, and I think that it should be part of the discussion every year. I think it needs to come up. I guess the only other one I would talk about here was Radnor Studio 21, which has a revenue associated with it, which we pass through to them. So that's why they're excluded, because that revenue is passed through. So I think it's, I don't like to have a hard cap on these, but I think that each year we should decide what this board, what the will of the board is. However we do it, though, we should break that out.
Are any of these entities grant eligible? Do you know or not?
I'm sure they're
That's grants, and they are receiving grants. I mean, do we know that they are receiving grants? Is that?
The library definitely.
I know the library, but how about these
Sean, there's no
senior
way these
centers.
groups, they're getting additional subsidies. They're, doing
I
individual
just want to make sure.
fundraising.
Sure,
They're
but just
doing
before our
grant
tax dollars
writing.
go, I would like to make sure that there are other.
But if there is a policy, maybe that's part of it, is that on an annual basis, if you receive funding from the township, you're required to submit information.
Sure.
Like how much of the township subsidy is, what percentage is that of your total operating budget?
Sure, well, just as what Bob is saying, that, if they come to us and they figure out they're gonna write a check and they don't have to do anything, and I'm not saying that's the case, but they should be required, and, if we're gonna give them money, they should be trying to get it in other areas. The other big thing I would say is that I don't wanna see any of these things go away. I believe a lot of our property values and our tax base is made up of services, and these are great things that, just like our parks, if you live close to one of these entities, or you live close to a park and you use it, it really can add value to one's home and one's property, and it's it really is a self-fulfilling prophecy. That when you live close to a park, I mean, I live in Garrett Hill, you have a lot of kids and there's a lot of demand. So our township is based on services, and there's a high demand of properties because of that. So I would not want to see any of these go away.
So I think we definitely have consensus, it would seem, that we want to continue to support these organizations. It's,
I've got questions on some of them. Surrey Services, we have 4 groups up there that cater to the senior demographic. And Surrey is.
You got a problem with that?
Paley? No, I don't, but I'm saying. Devin Paley. How many Radnor residents use Surrey, and could they not find the same services at the senior center, the arts center, or the library?
well, Surrey, they're the ones that provide
Hot meals.
hot meals and rides for people.
Yeah, I think they presented to us
Yeah,
last
they
year.
did.
Yeah,
Yeah,
meals
give us
for
a-
anyone 50, 55 and over.
They don't compete.
I hate to add in more groups, I don't remember why.
No, I'm not
Why didn't we
saying-
fund the Women's Resource Center? I would think that'd
I
be,
don't think they passed us.
They didn't ask
never-
us?
they
I
didn't
thought they
give us a
did.
specific number.
They didn't give us,
Yeah.
They proposed so, but I mean.
I mean, I think that'd be a
would
worthy-
in favor of them giving money over Surrey Services.
So the Women's Resource
There
Center
have been-
is actually funded by the school district and by the
Oh,
Radnor
they are?
Educational Foundation.
Oh, all right. Yeah, I've heard some complaints about Surrey. But
There have been issues in the past between that organization and the township.
Yeah.
They failed to respond at times that they needed them.
Well, maybe that's one of the questions you can ask, like what percentage of Radnor residents are you serving? I mean, I think the Wayne Senior Center is, would be, pretty much all Radnor residents, but maybe that is one, maybe that's one of the things you would want to ask. And if you're not serving more than,
Well, when we get
A
into
certain
budget
percentage.
season, we should specify a format that includes percentage of your business that's Radnor related. What grants have you applied for and how successful you've been? So there's some of the things. The historical side, wasn't that for care of the Finley House? That's why
He's correct.
most of it. Hell, they could be in this building, there's plenty of room.
What, you said the Historical Society should come into this building?
Sure, why not?
Well, I mean, they have their own building.
And we're paying $15,000 a year.
I think that Radnor Historical Society is also a value of the township that is worthy of that small honorarium. But again, I would just break it out. I think that Jake's point is well made. There seems to be redundant senior subsidies, and maybe there should be some effort between Surrey and Wayne Senior Center so that there's not duplication of efforts. I don't know if there is any, but maybe if there is. And also the point is how many people are out of the township that are using that, right? So those are valid considerations.
Okay, we'll wrap it up.
alright, so, we'll wrap it up. So, if you want to continue funding these organizations, we have some criteria that we think we want them to demonstrate how it's a service to the residents and a good utilization of the township dollars. I mean, did you guys, so you said last year they all came in and they gave presentations to us. said that's the first year you've done it that way?
We've had in the past,
Done
it's
that.
come in.
See, I think that's kind, I don't know, I feel like that, you know, they like have to come with their hat in their hand and justify, you know, is it enough that they, work with staff and put forth their funding requests, and then, you know, that's presented to us through the budget?
My opinion is I like where they come and talk to the board and present to the board, because I think it's a good opportunity for, I'll use the library as an example, the great programs and services that they provide are outstanding. So I think it's a good opportunity to know exactly where these dollars are going, what they're working at, especially too as a heads up if something's coming down the road, that there's something that may need partnership with the township to assist in.
Maybe we could do that on a more ongoing basis then, instead of just at budget time.
Sure, we can do that. It's just that I will say there's one organization here that on the list that I don't support funding.
I'm sorry.
There's only one organization on there I don't support
Okay.
funding.
Which one?
Surrey Services.
And I agree.
But
Yeah.
if we have a policy that the board's adopted, that if we're able to find some sort of formula on a percentage of revenues with caps, and then required information that the board wants to see from them annually, that changes the nature of the discussion when they come and meet. It's not so much hat in hand, it's, they understand what the formula is, and here's what they have to report. It's a little bit more of a business meeting than it is a, you know, an ask meeting.
I think it goes back to the point, like, Luke, if you put that within a percentage, and the township does better, and if there's a capital project or something that, you know, improving our building, like the library, there's areas still that need to be. So if you end up in that area, then the board can make a determination whether or not this is good funding for the township owner operating condition. I will say Annie's great to work with, she's been outstanding with our staff, and that's a last year for her.
So if there's a formula, it would be capped with some kind of adjustment annually, so it couldn't, if you had a year where your revenues from taxes exceeded the budget, that would not be adjusted accordingly.
It sounds like that's
Sean
what's being.
talked about not having a windfall, they're all saying you very
Yeah.
little time also.
Yeah.
So it's capped on the upside, but not limited on the downside. So that's pretty raw deal, huh? Right? If you're the library, or if you're one of these and you're like, well, I'm capped on the upside, but I'm unlimited exposure on the downside. That's kind of. If I'm counsel to them, I'd say, no, you better try to pressure to get a better deal than that. I wouldn't recommend it.
They have a good deal, they're getting.
Well,
free
there's, you
license.
kind of, well, remember, there's no deal. It's kind of our call at the end of the day.
Right, but
So,
when you
we can do whatever we want.
But when you codify it like that, you're kind of making that deal.
Well, listen, I'm not even saying you, I mean, like I said, if they're gonna experience the downturns with us, like last year, I mean, I'm okay with saying if we have a windfall year, they get more. I mean, I have no problem with that. I just think it's tough because we got hampered last year. I hear what the staff's saying. Their issue is we're guaranteeing, we're putting a floor on it, is what we're doing for them. We're giving them a minimum, which is that, right? And if we have a bad year this year,
Well, the way I look at it
eating
right
it,
now, we're not
so-
giving them, by doing it every year, by having it come up every year, to me, that's not a minimum. There's
Yeah,
not a
but
guarantee.
But
if
we
you-
always
if you
give them
write-
it, we're never gonna go, we've never gone below what we've given them the year before,
I know,
which I
but-
get, I understand that, but we
it's
never
out
do
there,
it,
though.
you know
But
what I mean?
we've never committed, but once you put in a formula, a funding formula, then, to me, now there is a commitment, and
Well,
that,
yeah.
now they can rely on that.
But it has.
Right now, they can't rely on it.
Well, but it has
Well, they
some
have to be. They
basis.
should be able
But
to
it has
rely
some
on it.
basis. For instance, if we feel like we're having a down year, whatever, and budget time comes around and we say, all right, library, instead of 974, you're gonna get 950, how do we come up with that? We have no idea. You know what I mean?
And
Whereas
there's-
if we say,
arbitrary.
that's roughly 2.5, the 1,210 is roughly 2.5% of our budget. So if we say community funding is 2.5%, the revenue sharing is different, because that depends on what comes in on the parking, but if we say you're getting 2.5%, and then it gets divvied up with roughly the library getting 1.25, whatever, we can justify it, right? We can justify the number based on what Bill White's projecting coming in.
And they can at least count on that. I mean, we can't, you know, one year say, oh, here's this, and then the next year pull the rug out from under them. I mean, you know, I think that if we come up with a formula and they can count on the fact that they're going to be getting the funding,
Maybe this
that
is
makes it
where
easier for them.
we end up similar to, what I call salary caps. You're capped at, you know, where you can go height-wise, but the board can set a floor that says it won't go below this floor. So the lowest amount will be X amount. So if the board said, look, we had an awful year, you're still committing to 900,000. You may be 900,000 or $1 million that says you committed to $1 million.
So they have something to
So
count
there's
on.
it can't go below that floor, which I think you're talking about, where everything gets pulled. So you can set the board, you can set a floor, and then set the ceiling on that too.
Well, you want them to be able to plan.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's fair.
Well, and the other, we have other policies that require the township to pass balanced budgets or keep a certain amount of cash in the general fund, which would require, and if we're talking something extreme, like an extreme revenue downturn, theoretically, the township, if it were to maintain services, would have to offset or plug that gap with a millage increase, which would,
That's actually illegal, right?
to adjust real estate taxes to fund
To fund this, right? So if we guarantee a floor, if somebody could interpret that as an automatic tax increase to fund this.
No, that's not where I was going.
Okay, all right.
No, I was just saying that at the end of the day, even if our initial projections are that we're going to see a 5% reduction in revenues, and the formula is, all right, we're going to reduce everybody by 5%. If at the end of the day the budget gets adopted and we've increased millage to plug that 5% gap on the rest of the budget, then the net effect to the revenues is now 0%, and that protects this group then from a major downturn or any kind of significant reduction in any year. So perhaps the formula is based on what the final adopted revenues are and not any of the initial estimates. And as you go through the process, there'll be ups and downs, but maybe that's the protection to keep them from losing out on a lot of money. And then I guess under that scenario, then administratively, there's some protection from a large downfall by adjusting taxes. They're protected in the same way.
So, Bill, my question is you say that you don't want to see these compete against township jobs or something. So when the library needs more money and the historical society needs more money, and they're going to wind up competing against themselves, so to speak, because there's going to be a fixed bucket of how much is in there. And then we're going to have to adjust the percentages.
Yeah, I mean, it could be as rigid as you want, but there'll always be opportunity for them to come and ask.
So we're just making more competition amongst them and less amongst everywhere else.
Yeah, at the end of the day, there's always going to be competition. The conflict is in how it's put together. And right now it's arbitrary. So the conflict is always between the administration and these organizations.
Mm-hmm.
And it shouldn't be that way.
Well, all I'm saying is if the library says we get 50% right off the top, and then Wayne Senior Center says, no, it's a special year, we need some of it. So now library may only get 45%, and then the Wayne Senior Center may get a little bit more, and then there's just going to be the competition there. So I don't know.
So the question is, out of that 1.2 million, does it remain proportional?
Well, that's what I was going to say. I don't know
That's a good question.
if we get into revamping this whole thing. I have no idea.
No, but
now we're really getting into the weeds.
But that's what's going to wind up happening. So they're going to come at the next meeting and they're going to say, no, we need more money. They're just going to wind up changing the I would think that
That's
they
why
would.
I hate these rules. If you do
Yeah.
a rule like that, you basically you're writing a contract.
Mhm.
I think that as politicians, we need to maintain the flexibility on this with just kind of a soft commitment.
I mean, I agree, it can't be arbitrary, it's 50,000 or 55,000, it should be a defined need, but finding that balance between it being arbitrary or being,
Codified,
yeah.
formulaic.
Yeah. So I don't know if that's something that you can kick around and get back, or I don't know.
Well, I've heard two different ideas coming from you guys, so I think the kicking around and coming back.
Is on us?
Well, they're two different. Well, I think, well, the amount.
Maybe what we could do is work on a formula. If it's too cumbersome and too confusing, then maybe that just eliminates itself as we discuss it. And then we're back to the more, whatever you got last year
Well,
plus.
the amount
20%.
is based on the amount's based on the presentation, right? So, like, I don't know what the senior center needs. I don't know what the art center needs, right? So I think they should come to us, and it should be a need. So they're not going to ask for anything less than what they're getting, I'm sure, right? So they're not going to ask for less, but they should be showing us a budget and saying this is what we need from you to get by, right? I mean, that'd be my thought. Like the Women's Resource Center, I would have thought they would have said, to plug our gap, we need 10 grand a year or whatever, right? That if you don't give us a number, we're not going to give you anything. So I'd like to see, without going into too much detail, I'm not looking through their ledgers and balance sheets and everything, but if they say if Surrey says we need 50 grand, that's exactly what we need to plug our gap based on our projections. All right, that gives me something concrete to work with and something logical.
Well, what we had.
You know what I mean? Like, that's on them to ask us, and then we can.
We had the senior center, we increased theirs because they wanted to hire a new social worker.
Well, there's a basis
So-
for their request.
Right,
You know
so,
what I mean?
so it wasn't a matter of gap, it comes down to who's asking for what, right, rather than a gap. So,
Well,
those
but-
entities that are asking for something
Right.
are gonna tend, the squeaky wheel gets the grease,
Yeah, but give us a reason. Don't come in and say we get 50, we want 60 now. Why?
Well,
Because we need it.
Even if you agree to that, but then you have to decide the proportionality of the pot, is that maintained or not?
Yeah, I don't know.
So, what you're saying is, no, it wouldn't be, because if you justify that.
We can revamp the whole thing.
Yeah, you
Well,
could.
I think if.
But it's also going to come down to priorities for us, right? Like, what do I use? My family uses the library, we use the art center, and the historical society to a certain
I mean,
extent.
by all means, what you
So-
use is what we should fund.
But I'm just saying, that's going to be my perspective, right? So there may be others.
Well,
there are other
Nichols over there,
perspectives.
the senior center, he's already ready to go in there.
I don't think so. He looks
I don't
pretty
think you're that
youthful.
far off.
But anyway,
No,
but
I'm
that's,
not.
so politics is going to come
We're all
into
on
a
the
certain
same road.
extent.
Yeah.
We're just at different stuff.
I mean, if the funding is good to a certain extent as it is, then these would be the proportions. And yeah, the library chews up a lot of it, but the library is also a widely, heavily used community.
Well, I think if we ran the proportions historically, we're gonna find that they're very consistent.
Yeah, probably.
There's not a lot of
And
change.
if we put something in place that all these groups are now aware of, that's something that they can consider when they're doing their budgeting as well.
Sure.
And then if they want something new, they have to fundraise it.
It would be nice to have a uniform grant proposal that they had to fill out. Because it sounds like we're all asking for the same information, basically. They show up and they make a pitch, and their pitch is always based on how great the service is that
A
they
funding
provide.
request of sorts.
Yeah. But the
Makes
library,
sense to me.
But you can't compare the library service to the Wayne Senior Center service. They're apples and oranges.
Oh, sure.
But if you say, tell us, like, I don't need your line-by-line information, but what's your overall budget, what was it last year, what's your shortfall this year, why do you need this money? And you guys, when you spend more than 10 seconds thinking about it, are gonna have better thoughts than I do about what such a form should look like, I'm sure, God, I hope.
That makes sense.
I would ask them all to fill out the same form.
Yeah. Make it more of a uniform process for them, right? Yeah. Makes sense.
And then as a board, you guys will carve out time.
No.
When are you gonna hear these?
I would suggest you guys should take the first stab.
Bob's
Which
right.
also-
Yeah, but they should come before the board, they should do their presentation, and so the public sees what they're doing.
Well, why don't they, my thought would be, and I'm not trying to make more work for the finance department, of course, but they would submit their forms to you all. You take those, and that gives you a uniform basis upon which to recommend, the
That's what I
funding.
said.
And of course, they're gonna work off these numbers, so.
That's what I said, they should work with the staff and then come to us, but I don't think they should come to us begging for money. I gotta say that made me really uncomfortable last year, and I don't think that people who are our residents, who are volunteering their time, people who are working with should feel like they need to come and beg for money.
I also kind of want to push back on what you said initially, which was that there's pressure to come up with a zero tax increase budget. I would love, forget about zero tax increase, I would love to give taxes back and lower them across the board. But I just hate when we start the year, like last year, with you come to us with a budget which sets the anchor, and it says we're gonna cut the police department, and then Lisa asks, well, won't that turn Radnor into a post-apocalyptic wasteland? And you, Bill, sit there and you're like, well, yeah, but it keeps the budget flat. So then there's just this long pause, and we have to figure out what we're gonna do afterwards. Like, figure out what you guys do. You run the township. Figure out what you need in order to do that, and then tell us. And we'll tell you we can't do that because you want to fix the sewer system. But other than that, like, we should have funding mechanisms that get you there.
I'll fix it for you.
I know. I'm on board.
Yeah.
Every time.
You are not getting that pressure from me. I suspect you're not getting it from others.
There has been that pressure in the past.
There has, but I've never put that pressure, Bob. As a matter of fact, I tell you most years to increase taxes. Right.
I know the one time we presented a budget at X percent, all of a sudden I'm reading in the newspapers, oh, that's ridiculous. It's like, okay.
Well, you
No,
could
no, no,
present-
zero's good. That's
You could
that's
present
the way.
different options. So the school district, when I was on the school board, I don't know how it was when you were Rich, they would present, the bells and whistles. They would present at, Act 1 with exceptions.
And the
And
post-apocalyptic wasteland.
the one where, there's no toilet paper for kids and, it's, awful. So, I mean, options, wiggle room, then we can say,
Well, one time,
what we
one
need.
time you presented one and there's all kinds of fluff in there. No, it's not. There's no, it's not like we're going high figuring, well, they'll come in and we'll still be ahead of what you approved. We're just coming in, here's what the numbers are.
You know we're always going to pick the one in the middle, so
Yeah, I mean,
make that your favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything wrong with them. I mean, I'm not going to micromanage the form, but, essentially what they've raised on their own, what they're anticipate getting in state grants, what they anticipate getting from whatever other sources are out there, and then what they need from us to plug it in and give us some logic behind it. Again, I'm sure the Wayne Senior Center will not ask for anything less than 145.5. I get that, right? I know that that's not going to happen, but still, there's some logic behind it, and
You may also
You know,
be
that-
able to point them to other grants. If you ask the
Good.
question, what have you applied for this year? And if they list 5 or 6, and you say, but you're missing out on the others, that could be a net win for them.
How's Molly on grant writing? Is that a criteria?
Well, a lot of it is, it's funny because some of the state grants that we've applied for, one sentence is too long.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, yeah.
what it comes down to, is one line, so.
But Molly could be useful in help letting people know that these are things that we are able to fund.
Absolutely.
So, do any of the commissioners have anything? I know we have some members of the community, your community here. Is there anyone, I know we have library as well represented. And if there's any other, I can't see any other community groups here.
I would like to hear from the audience if they wanted to speak.
Yeah, do you want to just come to the podium?
Sure, well,
Do something real.
okay.
Maybe the treasurer wants to say a few words.
I'm going to yield the floor to some we're talking comments. My name is Bill Wall, and I'm Vice President of the Radnor Library, and I've been on the board for a year. I've been a Radnor resident for 30 years, pre-kids, kids, and post-kids. So I've been through the whole continuum with the library, and it's obviously a crown jewel. One thing Rich said at the beginning, which I think is really spot on, which is
Parking?
parking.
Let's not go back there.
This is the library, and I speak just about the library, is really thought of as a township function. I mean, when I got on, I'm a corporate lawyer by background, but you've got the township leasing the library for $1 a year to this 501c3, which is memberless, basically. and you fund 3/4 of our budget. And if you went to any of your constituents, my guess is 9.9 out of 10 would say, the township owns the library, the township owns the library. Who are you kidding? So I would just say, as you go through thinking of the community versus us as a township, or subsidizing you versus paying the township manager's salary, think a little bit about a distinction without a difference on some of this, and just be careful about separate formulas and where that leads, because ultimately this is really functionally, I believe, a township crown jewel. So, thanks a lot.
To go along with that, in the almost 4 years I've been on this board, I've realized that no one really cares about much of what we do at all, or knows. However, when the library was shut down, oof,
Right.
it was not fun to be on the BOC. So that was definitely noticed, and a
Or
lot
on the
of people
library
cared.
board.
Yeah. People were not happy about that. So yeah, I get that. I agree.
I use a lot.
I'm Annie Leckley. I'm the executive director at the library. I just want to say 65 to 70% of the budget is from the township. just want to throw that out there. I really appreciate this examination of how the contributions to the nonprofits go. I think you were spot on in talking about reporting back out to the township. All of us nonprofits receive grants and funding from other government entities, and we're really used to doing lots of reporting. So I think any of us would be more than happy to just roll those statistics right on into your report as well. I also really appreciate the thought about structuring these presentations. I felt like in the last few years I wasn't really sure what I was coming into. So I talked about all the great things happening at the library, but I wasn't exactly sure what you were looking for. So if you gave us more of an idea of exactly what you'd like presented, like the form that you're talking about, I think that would be really helpful to give a structure. I remember last year, some people had PowerPoints and had, 15-page color documents that they were handing out, and some of us just talked. And so it was a wide variety. So having that structure would be really helpful for the nonprofits, I think. So I would love to see you go in that direction. We got lots of library.
Well, so,
yeah,
hi, I'm Sarah Mara. I'm co-president of the library board, and so I concur with what my fellow library board members said. We did, we value the township's partnership, and we're, so thankful for everything we get, and we want to be good partners, which is why a fair percentage of the board showed up for this meeting. A couple things I wanted to say to Annie's point about the contribution of the township as the library's total portion of the budget. I think most people in the township, like literally I've done many, many interviews of prospective board members at this point. Nobody knows that we raise on our own a really substantial portion of our budget. I think everyone just assumes if we're not a township entity itself that they pay for everything. So Rich, thank you very much for pointing to the all up downside, no upside argument. I totally sign on to that. And if you want to break out, I don't think we as a board support the separate millage line, but if you want to break out, your community services go to that. I'd also like to see that is X percentage of the library's budget, because people should know that we hustle a lot to get what we do. And we'll continue to hustle, and but we do need a base. And so to the downside point too, I think the township with a $40 million budget is a little better positioned to absorb the vagaries of revenue year over year than a library with a relatively smaller budget. We don't have so many positions that we could let one lie fallow. We at that point would have a serious impact on the operations. It would result in perhaps closures or something like that. I mean, back a few years ago,
I've been a Radnor resident for 20 years, but during the big financial crisis, we actually had to really retrench our hours. And while I think we would understand, and as partners, again, be willing to do something like that if, there was another major financial crisis, I think we don't want to have to, year over year, be sort of freaked out about, are we going to be able to staff the library properly because there was a one-off reduction in the business tax. And then the other thing I just wanted to say too was all for transparency. I think Amy did a great job last year of presenting. I think we would be thrilled to present whatever you want and be completely transparent about our budget, get any feedback from you guys about alternative revenue sources that we could have. And I think that's, a great idea. But I would encourage you to think of the library, for funding purposes as really an integral part of the township and not something that should be broken off as like a separate millage line or something that, is, like the fourth person in traffic control. So thanks very much.
Sarah Billing, Garrett Avenue. Gosh, I think I'm now a 39-year resident. This is difficult because I want to speak about Surrey Services. I tried to use Surrey Services in the past, and I'm a senior, and I'm going to need something. And no, you're too far away. No, we can't possibly get you to a doctor's appointment at the time you're supposed to come. We'll pick you up when we can. It just was very unsatisfactory. What I did hear last year was that Surrey Services had reached out to COSA, which is in media, and they're working with Community Action Agency. They're working more down county. What I would like to see Surrey do, if they're going to do this, is to begin to reach out to seniors. And my hat is climate change. And we've just been through 5 days with a dew point of over 70. That's oppressive. So for seniors who live in Radnor Township, Surrey should be offering fans, small air conditioners, a cooling center, cold meals. They need to tailor their services to what our needs are going to be in Radnor Township for seniors. So I would ask them specifically what they're doing, and I have a feeling that, oh yes, they serve Radnor, but it's not very high. The Wayne Senior Center, I would encourage them to begin to be proactive and to look ahead. Because we're going to go through 6 days of over 90 this next week, and you can be sure the dew point is going to be 70 or higher, which is oppressive for babies and seniors, and that's when they start to die. So if you're going to give to these seniors, I think you need to be sure that they're tailoring it to meet the physical needs of the seniors who live in Radnor. Because I know some who live in Garrett Hill who have no fans and have no AC, and I don't know how they were making it this last week. Thank you.
Tim Fry, Ward 7. I think this has been a really healthy exchange so far tonight. Frankly, I think that when you're looking at the list of different types of community-funded projects out there, the library is by far its own separate entity, and it should be addressed separately. It shouldn't even be part of what's being talked about to try to determine the budget for the remainder of the projects out there. I think it needs to be almost separated out to give it its due respect, but also to make sure that the other ones are not being commingled in with it. And if you do that, you're looking at about $250,000 using the 2019 projections. So at that point, you're looking at the ability to establish a pool. You can use the percentages like Luke was talking about. I think that's a smart idea in order to be able to budget out and plan the amount of money that's going to be available for different types of community services. But then the next question that needs to be addressed goes to the objective forms that I think that's a great idea to have. But then it's the reason why that they're actually being funded. They need to be actually able to establish the entitlement to being funded. It's not a guarantee of funding. I think that needs to be something that's addressed Because while they do provide services, they need to be able to establish those so that we can, as a community, know what our tax dollars are going to fund. And using that objective floor and the different measure, it helps. But then when you're doing that, you can also provide a floor for the different entities. You can provide a cap for the different entities. And then you can provide for the discretion to use the surplus in the funds in a good year while also protecting people in a down year. And so I think just listening tonight, I think those are types of objective measures that can be used by the staff in order to create the budget and make a sustainable financial plan and goal to help our community.
Any other comments? Bill, do you guys feel like you have enough to get started, or?
I think so.
Support boards?
Bob doesn't agree.
Yeah.
Bob's looking for more definitive direction. My view is, I agree with Bob, we need to have an annual presentation. I think that there's some structures, a good idea, but
I don't think he's disagreeing with that.
I don't think so either. I don't think that we need a form, though. I hate to be overly rigid in his bureaucracy. But, I mean, some sort of a presentation, I think. Actually, I haven't been dissatisfied with the presentations that have been here, so.
Yeah, but remember, it's about.
I don't want to give them another form that they have to go
No, I hear
through.
you. I hear you, but at the same time, remember, at the end of the day, it's about dollars and cents, right? So they can come in and tell us how wonderful they are all day, and that's great. And they all provide good services, but these are numbers, right? So I think we're trying to provide some uniformity to it, you know? So I hear you. I mean, I don't want to provide more.
Some kind of a
forms, but
simple form. If you
As
had-
Andy said, they're used to this, though.
Yeah.
At the same time, they're used to this.
But
This is
Rich,
part of their,
if
what they do.
If it saves 45-minute presentation because we get what we need on the form, then that could save us a lot of time, because when they present, there's usually 7 or 8 entities that are here, and these things go on and on and on forever, and you want to give everybody their due time.
Well, I want them to present so that it goes on television so the public can see, what it is. So that's why. And I know I know it's a burden on time, but that's, I think, worth it.
Well, no, but I think you're reading it as we're replacing out the forms, and I think we do both.
Right.
But I think the forms do provide some uniformity.
Yeah, if it gives them more of an outline to present, then we also are sitting through presentations that are similar, and we can measure and like that stuff. And I think that we should be giving these groups opportunities at other times during the year to just come in and talk about all the great things that they are doing, not just at budget time.
I mean, whatever's apples to apples should be compared as such, and whatever's different, then you'll have to look at that for them.
Need a little more? You wanted us?
We're okay for
Your
He's had enough. But I think it gives the staff cover too, right? I mean, they're gonna, hopefully the form has them literally putting in writing what they're looking for and a basis for it. You know? At the end of the day, we make the decision and it's that, but hopefully that helps at the end of the day.
And then we go through all these exercises and we get to the point of voting on a budget that includes the numbers that we've worked through to come up with. We can all approve it. Everyone can vote yes.
One page. Just a front.
Oh, yeah,
Is
no,
there
very
anything
simple.
else?
think
Anyone
so.
have any other? You guys have enough to at least get started. Alright, and we will revisit this, we'll pick it up again.
probably, I know September, there was no special meeting in August. So September is sidewalks and trees. And so it's possible we could have this forum for you and that meeting special.
So
Or the
we
regular
should-
meeting.
We change that to, we do for the fire department and the community groups? Or do we need to do, because how are we handling sidewalks and trees and other facets of work that we're doing?
Well, the special meeting in September is just sidewalks and trees. And
facilities the following month.
Because we're gonna be
But we
because
want
budget
this-
time will
we
be
should be seeing
October,
the
right?
budget.
We want this ahead of budget time.
Yeah.
So we want to move the trees and sidewalk stuff into the first meeting in September as part of the board meeting.
We can, on this particular issue, I think by the end of July, we can have something in draft form to the commissioners for you guys to start considering. And then maybe have it, is there a meeting in August?
We should talk about it in our August
And
meeting.
then a decision at the August meeting. And then
So
we
then
go-
you have something to start to work with for
And
the
then,
budget.
yeah, then we can make sure the community groups have it. It will not be complicated.
But Bill, can I just
It'll be
ask
simple.
one question? Because a lot of this is gonna relate to our mercantile and our privilege tax. Do you have an idea how that's coming in so far this year?
I have a very good idea. What I
Okay.
don't have is the detail behind it because it's still getting entered into the system.
So is
But the
it-
aggregate numbers for the mercantile are very good.
Okay.
And the aggregate numbers for the BPT are not very good, so.
Okay. So, okay, just so I think, knowing that, that may move us in the right way of which process. There are two competing processes that we can choose to know.
All right. We good? Anyone have anything else? No?
Move to adjourn.
All right. Can I get a
Second.
motion to, oh.
You said move.
All right. We're, all in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned. Thank you
Thank
all
you.
very much.
Thank you.